Hey everyone, I'm back at the office. Are you all happy? Mrs. Xu is still unconscious. She's the smart one. I'm not. Yesterday afternoon, I already filmed a video, and in the evening I chatted with everyone on Clubhouse for 2 hours. This morning, I got up and came back to the office again. So, what is this video about? It's about how Donald Trump actually left the G7 meeting before it was over. What was the reason behind that? His disagreements with the other 6 G7 countries have certainly been getting more and more serious. But since he was able to attend, he really shouldn't have left early. So how exactly did he leave early? I'll give you an answer at the end. Donald Trump was originally scheduled to have a bilateral meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky on the last day of the G7 summit. But for some unknown reason, he left a day early, returned to Washington, and took this photo. Why did he go back early? White House Press Secretary Leavitt said it was due to the tense situation in the Middle East. On the evening of June 16th, after finishing his trip to the G7 summit in Canada and returning to the White House, Macron speculated about why he left early. He said that Trump's early return could mean there's a breakthrough in the ceasefire between Israel and Iran, and that Trump is going back to negotiate that ceasefire, which is something worth paying attention to. He clarified that this was just his guess. You suddenly left without saying why, and only mentioned it was related to the Israel-Iran situation. So he guessed it was about a ceasefire, but ended up getting scolded by Donald Trump. I'll give you an explanation for this. Donald Trump lashed out at Macron on Truth Social. He said this guy is just trying to get public attention and wrongly claimed I left because of the ceasefire. That's not true. Going back to Washington had nothing to do with the ceasefire. It was for something much bigger than that. He also criticized Macron, saying he's not sure if it was on purpose, but Macron always gets things wrong. He really dislikes Macron. Let me clear up a mystery for everyone here. Why does he dislike Macron so much? Apparently, Macron made fun of him behind his back. His military parade was unimpressive because the French also hold parades, and theirs are much more impressive. They really know how to do it. The United States hasn't held a military parade in 34 years. The last time was in 1991, after they won the war. But it didn't really matter. It was a parade and everyone marched randomly. The American military doesn't actually practice marching drills. I've asked people who have served in the U.S. military, and it's really different from those who are used to formal parade ceremonies. That day, I noticed Donald Trump looked quite displeased. The troops were basically all over the place, and Macron was mocking him behind his back. Of course, Trump noticed, and he lashed out at Macron. On Air Force One, he said, "We're not seeking a ceasefire. I never said we're seeking a ceasefire. What we're after is an end, a real end. I'll explain what that means in a bit." According to U.S. media reports, Donald Trump went to the White House Situation Room, and going there means he was watching the battle unfold in real time. There's surveillance footage showing, for example, when they raided the terrorists, Obama was right there watching when they went after bin Laden. Donald Trump said he doesn't trust phone calls and believes it's better to attend meetings in person. He was likely holding important meetings with the National Security Advisor and making decisions. I'll tell everyone about this at the end. The G7 summit did not issue a joint statement on the Russia-Ukraine war. For the past 3 years, the G7 summits have always condemned Russia's acts of aggression. This time, Donald Trump did not agree with doing that, but the G7 still reached a consensus. It's absolutely not true that he left halfway through because of differences over the Ukraine issue. Earlier, Canadian officials mentioned that the United States intended to downplay this statement, and then Donald Trump said it was because he wanted to mediate between Russia and Ukraine. So, if you want Russia to come to the table for talks, you shouldn't criticize them. The other 6 countries accepted this, according to Canadian officials. Given the current situation, it's impossible to find wording that all 7 countries can agree on, so there was no statement. Zelensky was originally scheduled to hold a bilateral meeting with Donald Trump following the one in Rome. He warned G7 leaders that diplomacy is currently in a state of crisis. They urged Donald Trump to use his real influence to pressure Russia to end the war. At this point, I have serious doubts about Donald Trump. I'm trying to look at this issue as objectively as possible. During the summit, Russia launched the most severe bombing of Kyiv since the 2022 invasion, resulting in 10 deaths. The war continues to worsen, and Russia has intensified its counterattacks in response to several surprise raids by Ukraine, which caused heavy losses for Russia. But we remember that Donald Trump himself said that if Russia refused to agree to a ceasefire, he would sanction Russia. Whether or not he actually sanctions Russia will show, in the end, whether Russia has something on him. Now, I see that he doesn't dare to sanction Russia, which makes him look very suspicious. As a result, the Canadian Prime Minister issued a personal chair's statement expressing that the G7 supports Donald Trump and his efforts to achieve a fair peace for Ukraine. Supporting you in negotiating is a very neutral stance. Everyone knows that a chair's statement is different from a joint statement. A joint statement requires every word to be agreed upon by all countries. This shows that there are serious divisions within the G7 on this issue, and it's impossible for them to be unified when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine matter. And Donald Trump actually said that expelling Russia from the G8 in 2014, after it annexed Crimea, was a huge mistake that led to the Ukraine war in 2022. In other words, he's putting the blame on everyone else instead of on Russia. If, back in 2014, there had been immediate and severe sanctions against Russia, back during the Obama era, it wouldn't have led to today's Russia-Ukraine war. If Russia had been seriously sanctioned at that time, Russia absolutely wouldn't have had the ability to launch today's war. That's the truth, not what Donald Trump is saying. He claims that if Russia hadn't been kicked out of the G8, the war wouldn't have happened, because expelling Russia deeply humiliated Putin. You can say that these are arbitrary. If Russia invades Ukraine and these countries do not impose sanctions. You could also put it another way. It would only encourage Russia to be even bolder in its aggression. That's actually a pretty mild consequence. Donald Trump criticized Obama and Trudeau for not letting Russia stay, saying it was a wrong decision, but that's actually nonsense. At that time, Trudeau wasn't even prime minister yet. Donald Trump, well, even those MAGA folks would agree, he just keeps making things up all the time. Because he just says whatever comes to mind, without caring about the facts. Spending so much time discussing Russia, and with them not even at the negotiating table, just makes things even more complicated. What kind of logic is that? Discussing Russia at length is exactly about deciding how to deal with Russia. Russia doesn't necessarily have to be at the negotiating table. You can discuss things first and then negotiate with them, or put even more pressure on them to make them give in. So, spending a lot of time discussing Russia is necessary. And as usual, Donald Trump is completely illogical. All right, when people ask whether China should be allowed to join the G7, he says Russia can join. That's not bad either. If someone wants to suggest letting China join, I don't mind. I just want to ask those so-called grand strategists, the ones who believe Donald Trump's ultimate goal is to contain China. How do you explain this? He actually wants to develop economic and trade relations with China, I'm telling you. The US and China should reach a trade agreement, and then they'll develop economic relations with China. Donald Trump's position is different from the other G7 members. In 2021, the G7 also took a very tough stance towards China, criticizing its human rights and trade issues. After the meeting, von der Leyen made some comments. "We must take the issue of China seriously." He said that although there are internal differences among Western countries, including Donald Trump's differing views, the disagreements with China are even more serious. China uses rare earths as a weapon, which is why for the past year or two, there's been talk about de-risking and reducing dependence. It's not just about getting started, but rather that all Western countries need to work together on this. European officials revealed that Donald Trump is paying attention to this. Various countries have emphasized to him the importance of taking a tough stance against Russia, but he doesn't seem inclined to impose sanctions, which is different from what he used to say. He sanctions Ukraine, but won't sanction Russia. He says that sanctions aren't that simple. Any new measures would bring huge costs to the United States. Honestly, I don't know what huge costs he's talking about. Trade between the US and Russia is already zero. It's already been reduced to nothing. Now, so-called sanctions against Russia are really just targeting those black market Russian oil tankers and financial networks. This actually only benefits the United States, because if Russian oil can't be bought, then the US can sell more of its own oil. The G7 didn't issue a joint communiqué as usual. Instead, they broke things down item by item because they couldn't reach an agreement on the Ukraine issue, which led to key protests. Rare earths, artificial intelligence, forest fires, these are topics everyone agrees on. Quantum computing, human smuggling, transnational repression. They released 6 separate statements on these issues. The only consensus was the joint statement on the Israel-Iran conflict, supporting Israel's right to self-defense. I've already mentioned this. As for Israel bombing Iran this time, I sympathize with them. I look at each issue separately. Iran has always been the source of trouble in the Middle East, and it's a country where religion and politics are completely intertwined. Of course, from the bottom of my heart, I strongly oppose it, because the regime is extremely brutal and suppresses freedom for the Iranian people. If a country like this were to possess atomic bombs, it would be far too dangerous. Having nuclear weapons is just too risky. Israel is a country that can't afford to lose its focus, so when Israel attacks Iran, even though it does violate Iran's sovereignty, I think it's understandable. My view is the same as the G7's. So what happened in the end? Medvedev praised Donald Trump for doing a good job. He said that the European lackeys led by Macron should know their place. Aren't you all just America's lackeys? The U.S. is pro-Russia. More than 80 U.S. senators have currently proposed sanctions against Russia in response to recent events. Using a secondary tariff approach, meaning anyone who buys Russian oil will be hit with a 500% tariff. The only thing stopping this is Mike Johnson, as Speaker of the House, hasn't brought this matter up for a vote as of now. Otherwise, it would definitely pass, and Russia would be pushed to the brink. Russia would have no choice but to surrender, but Donald Trump is firmly opposed to it. Let me ask everyone why. This could bring about peace between Russia and Ukraine. Why? Because if Russia loses its oil exports, its economy would collapse immediately. Medvedev said the G7 is a dead club. He mentioned that even when he attended the G8, they were already like zombies, completely ineffective. The Washington Post reported that Donald Trump leaving early was a blow to the organizers of the G7 summit, showing that there are serious rifts within the Western alliance. Donald Trump put forward, "Make America Great Again," and then withdrew from the role of world police, causing the world order to fall apart. The America First policy and the other G7 members have irreconcilable differences on the Russia-Ukraine war and sanctions against Russia. Let me give you the final answer. What did he rush back to do? Some people say he rushed back for the White House, where 2 flagpoles were set up. He even left a comment about it, but of course, that was just a joke. He said he couldn't stand others mocking his military parade behind his back. That's Macron. But the real reason is, he had to go back to make a decision. I believe that this weekend, on Friday, it's about whether to provide Israel with bunker buster bombs and B-2s to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities. Only the United States has such massive bunker buster bombs. Each one weighs 30 tons, and only the B-2 can carry them. Only those bunker buster bombs, using 6 of them, each weighing 30 tons, can destroy Iran's underground nuclear facilities. This is the issue he has to decide on. This is what he means by the end. If Iran's nuclear facilities no longer exist, then there would be no threat to Israel's security. This is his real position on ending it all. He has never said he wants to overthrow Iran's theocratic system. He just wants to put an end to Iran's nuclear program.